going to call the work session to order. We're going to start by just kind of going back to where we ended last week regarding the budget. And I don't know if Todd or Dr. Sabum, if you had anything to add or.
No, I don't have anything specific. I think the only change that was requested was that we separate out the line item for clarity. And so I don't know if the board wants to make any further comments about the SBI clarification, but I think that was the only thing. Otherwise, it would be if anybody else has any other topics or questions or clarifications to get us to the point where you're comfortable with bringing this back to the next board meeting for what the board has typically done is approval of a tentative budget adoption, which gives us the ability to go ahead with hires and contracts and things that go into next year. That would come on the next board meeting.
Okay. So I guess since I'm the one that brought up the SBI part, I'll just go back to that and hope that you guys have gotten a chance to think about that or if you have any additional questions. So again, my recommendation was that instead of just deleting the funds that we were providing to SBI that were part of our ESSER funds, which if I recall was like $109,000. That was an effort to help them to recruit and maintain their drivers, that we remove that in a stepwise fashion. And I don't have any, I don't have anything in mind as far as I want it to be a certain way. It could be 2 years, it could be 3 years, whatever people think. But just in a way for them to be able to react and hire bus drivers and maintain them so that we don't have any issues with kids arriving late to school due to having to run multiple routes with the same driver, doing elementary and middle school, for example. And so my recommendation, I guess, $106,000 would be either from a 2-year or a 3-year step down process, giving them, again, a time to adjust their budget and react to that.
And just for clarification, how that would appear is just in whatever that first year amount would be what would be reflected in the budget. And then it would be with the understanding that that second amount would be brought forward next year for a second reduction. But we probably wouldn't necessarily spell that out in the actual budget document that you would have.
I would suggest that we stay with the administrative line of taking out the SBI payments in one payment this year. Last time we met, when I asked the question, is SBI had any contacts from the district? And the answer was yes, that the district has talked to SBI. So it's not like it's a surprise to them. So hopefully they are making adjustments now. And so I would support what the district proposed.
I would second that.
Oh, we're not voting.
Oh,
we don't vote at a work session. Yeah, so just conversation.
Mm-hmm. I'm more in favor of a tiered step down. 2 years would be my preference.
I agree.
So again, food for thought. We aren't making any decisions today. We're just talking about the budget. Did you want to say something else? I didn't know if you had more to say.
No, you know what? I was actually curious where that 106 is.
Right here.
This is the Did they bring it up? Mm-hmm.
So we asked them last time to have a separate line item.
These two were together last time, so now we split it into two. Oh, sure. It's just more clear. Yeah, yeah, that is more clear. Because last time there was some real confusion.
So what I would say is we could do one of two things. We can bring it as proposed. You can make a motion to amend and vote and use that process like you typically would if there's not necessarily 100% agreement. So I think you can think about that between now and when you actually go to approve it at the next board meeting and work through that process.
So I have just a point of clarification. We would be deficit spending, correct? If we broke that down, we would be.
Well, it's potentially what, $50,000 that we would then it would go away in 2 years.
It would just go away. I mean,
because we're not going to pay them anymore. Like it would be a 2-year give them this much now, give them the next much done later, and then we're done. Like, it's not a long-term commitment of any sort.
I would be curious then where we're making, if we don't cut that, what we're cutting then out of here.
There's no resulting cause and effect cut. It's either a 1 year or a 2 year reduction to SBI. It's just with our current funding that goes directly to SBI.
Todd, is that your interpretation as well?
Yeah, we just alter the fund balance by $53,000. And we alter it next year, and then we alter it 20 years later.
No. Maybe it's a now. Now it is.
Yeah. It would alter the fund balance.
It's by $53,000. It would, next year's fund balance, we'd dip into it by 53,000, but that would only be a one-time effect on that. And it's not going to be 53 new thousand every year. It's just the 1 year. So if the fund balance, I'll make up a number, was going to be 10 million next year, it would be 53,000 less than that. And the year after, if it was going to be 9 million, it would be 53,000 less than that. I think we show it going down for 2 more years, and then I believe it's going back up. It's in our document if we go to that, but I don't have that open right now. So it's a one-time $53,000 hit.
Yeah. So again, think about that, and we can talk about that when we tentatively approve the budget at our next meeting. Did anybody else have any other questions regarding? Go ahead. Yeah, we can stay on the SBI topic. That's fine. Or no? Okay, then anything. Yeah, we can move from that, and now it's anything.
Well, I'm going to put this out in the public because I've had some conversations that weren't public about this. But I think this would be a good time for us to seriously talk about freezing our administrator salaries. I'm going to preface this by saying this. I have many, many years of negotiating history. I have my name on many, many contracts. I understand the bargaining process. I've bargained on both sides of the table in 4 different school districts. So I have all the great respect in the world for contracts, for tentative agreement, for the bargaining process. My fear is a year from now, we don't know where we're going to be. My fear is we don't know what's going to happen at the federal level. We don't know what's going to happen at the state level. We don't know what the legislature is going to bring forward. They tried a couple things this last session. I think we should be proactive in that. Right now, I understand the process. I know that it's in the general administrator's unit's hands. And if they choose to make a change, that would be awesome. If they choose not to make a change, I respect that, because I understand the process and I understand where we are. I just think that it would be a good show of faith. We continue with the raises for the other employees in the district, but I just think it would be a good show of faith. I'm a little concerned about some activities that might happen this summer with different task groups and summer studies that legislators might do. I was very concerned about a bill that was in the legislature this year. And so I just think it would be a good thing. Like I said, I have all the respect in the world for the negotiators, for the process, for what's been determined at this point. And it's in their hands right now, and I will respect whatever decision they make. Thank you.
Can you just clarify what you mean when you say it's in their hands?
They've bargained the contract. I'm assuming they have a tentative agreement so far. We're going to vote on their contracts in the end of April. So at this point, the negotiations part is done. So the only thing they could do, am I wrong about that?
Yeah, their contract isn't up for.
They have a current contract
Right.
that is
Okay,
not up
so-
for renegotiation. You would have to, the board would have to vote and make a motion to request to reopen. You would have to approve that for yourself to request it, and then the administrative bargaining group would have to agree per their contract to reopen.
They could have a general meeting they could do a memorandum of understanding. That would be another way, I believe, that this could happen. But that's what I said, it's in their hands. And I
It's
respect
really the
that
board's
process.
hands, just to clarify that. The board would have to initiate that process, making a motion to reopen.
Because when is their contract up? Remind me.
2028.
2028. So I think in the contract it states that no changes can be made to it unless it's mutually agreed upon by both parties. And so I think to your point, we would initiate that if that was something that we all agreed on. And then they would have to agree to do that. And I guess from my perspective, when I think about the role of the administrator and how that's changed in the last 10 years even, it's not an 8 to 5 job. It's a 24/7. They're managing emails and phone calls and keeping our kids safe, helping them to learn. I don't have an issue with the contract the way it is. And any increases, I believe, that we make to teachers then just trickles down to all the other staff categories. And so I think our administrators work just as hard as other people in our district. And so I wouldn't expect them to want to or offer that.
I'm not insinuating they don't work hard, they don't have difficult jobs. Remember, I was an administrator in this district and 2 others, so I would never say that. I would never say anybody who works for this district doesn't work hard. That wasn't my insinuation at all. I'm just very worried about where we're going to be a year from now in the budget process. That's it.
Was there a particular group of administrators getting a raise over other people? Is it across the board that you were looking at, Gail? Or was it every level, or what's the line item maybe?
Well, I don't know what the process is for the executive administrators. I'm talking about our building administrators and that level of administrator.
Because I don't know, maybe I'm just like reading it wrong. The only, I think the only increase I saw, somebody correct me please, was elementary level. There was an increase for admin in one line item.
Not related to this. The contracts are all tied to the annual increase to our teacher contracts. That's how they are worded. So any renegotiating of the language that affects the annual increases that are built into current contracts can only be modified if you reopen that contract. So the increase that you may be referring to in there may be because we're opening Marcelo LeBeau and we're adding another elementary principal.
Okay.
Todd, can I put you on the spot? Could you give us just a brief explanation of what we've done over the last couple of years as we raised teachers' pay and what that did to the administrative salary, please?
No.
Yeah, the last, I think it was 3 years ago, we had a negotiation with the administrators. You might be off by one, but the agreement then was to just fund it for 1 more year as it was, and then we came up with a new agreement. Those of you that were on, maybe it was 3 of you that were on the board might remember that. So we looked at teacher salary growth back to 2001, admin salary growth back to 2001. We looked at classified staff salary growth back to 2001. And the classified staff and the admin staff had grown at about the same rate, but the teachers had fallen behind. And the reason for that is because the classified staff and the admin staff, whatever lane you're in, you are the highest paid person, whether they've been here 30 years or 15 years or 40 years, makes about roughly 15% more than the lowest paid for both the admin and the teachers. And the teachers, it had changed over time, but back in 2001, it was more than twice. It was about 130%. if I remember right. Anyway, when you have that, it costs more to fund movement on a schedule than than when you just have a kind of a smaller schedule. So over the past, since starting in 2003, I think it was, we have started collapsing those steps. We did it again. I don't think you were teaching them, but we did it in 2008, FY08, and then we did it rather substantially lately. And I'll kind of go through lately because I think that's what you're referring to, man, is that lately we still had this 10-step schedule. We've got it down from 33 steps to 28 down to 10. But there was still a pretty good gap. Our starting teachers made less than $38,000 4 years ago. And so we made a concerted effort to get them up to 51. And now they started, and not only did we get them up to 51, they now started over 52 because we also took off one more step. So now it's still there because we based the schedule on it, but now it's steps 2 through 10 on the schedule. Anyway, that was part of that drive, and that was actually very expensive to do. But we did get the starting pay way up, and then anybody else that would have been lower than as they moved up, they all rolled up. So almost everybody at the very top rolled up extra, not as much, but you had to keep moving it forward. So this person on step 4 doesn't make more than the person on step 1. Then this last year we added, kind of at the request of the teachers, over the years, I don't know that they specifically asked for it last year, we added 2 or 3 more rungs at the top that they could get, so that they weren't the only ones that didn't really get the advantage of all that movement over the last 3 or 4 years. In the meantime, we also looked at what the top teacher was paid per day, per diem, versus the lowest paid administrator, and established a mark of that being 99% that the top teacher paid per diem versus the lowest paid administrator per diem. And we said to the administrators when we negotiated and when they said, you're going to go up half of what the teachers go up until you get to that mark. Now, because of all that movement we did over the last couple of years, last 3 or 4 years, they're at that. But for a couple of years, they grew at half the rate of everybody else, because pretty much in this district, everybody's salaries are tied to the teacher schedule. So, but for a couple of years, they did less than that. And then we got to that mark last year. So now they're tied to it. And their agreement through 2028 is that whatever the teacher's schedule moves, their schedule will move the same amount. And does that answer your question?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And if you don't feel interrogated, I have another question.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Do you have the numbers in front of you, or could you do kind of some quick math? If we were to freeze administrative salary, what would that savings look like for the district?
Yeah, the salary part in the general fund of this admin increase is $287,000. If you add STRS to it and you add Social Security, its total is $326,000.
Thinks that helps to put it into perspective somewhat.
Of all the groups, that increase costs the least.
The least.
Yeah.
Anything else on that one?
I
Am
don't
I
have
asking
any-
a question? Okay, I have a question. Just obviously, we have a couple years of these tough conversations. So, looking through our assessments and some of those numbers, the MAPS test assessment was rising from 170,000 in 2017 to 225,000 in 2023. Curious if we're looking at assessment tools like Canvas, Mastery, Connect, Dreambox, Lexia, are we being fiscally responsible and continuing with all of them? Should we be narrowing it down to a certain one that works best? Not calling for anything to jump out at us this year, but again, we have so many conversations ahead of us the next couple years, that it would be nice to know which one of these is going to be the most helpful for our student learning and assessment and progress. So I don't know if anybody else has looked at that or has heavy feelings about it, but would love to start that conversation too.
I would say our process has many eyes looking at those, from our departments to our budget group, and that was not a recommendation brought forward, but one that could be considered in the future. They all serve a purpose. They're all woven into many of the accountability measures that we have as a district, and they're used extensively in our building level work, our school improvement plans. I just signed 2 documents yesterday that are required by the state with some of the accountability measures that had MAP directly tied to that. So I think it's a conversation that you can certainly have, but it's extensive, and it's an instructional decision as well as a budgetary decision. And I would suggest, if that's something the board wants to consider for next year, that you have some work session time spent on that, maybe early in the fall, where Dr. Zeke can give an overview of the assessment plan that we have right now, and some of the tools that we're using. Some of those have been reviewed in some different ways this year. We've also had work that Doug and Nicole have done in terms of building out our internal capability for using that data in our data viz capabilities. And so the ability to use that data is much more enhanced from what it maybe once was for our schools. I was just in 2 schools this morning, and we talked just related to some of their individual school improvement goals this year, and they both referenced MAP as part of that. But yet there is always that perception, question, reality, however you think about it, in terms of what assessments are worthy of keeping around, what assessments are valuable, and what gives us the best picture of that. So not going into all of that, I think that's what you would want to get a good picture of, if that's a consideration that you want to make for next year. If you're going to let go of one of those assessments, that people have time, number one, to adjust to that with all of the ways it's woven in, and that it's a good, solid instructional decision. MAP is our only assessment that goes really K-11-ish, and gives you a grade level by grade level look, rather than our state assessments that are just in a few grades along the way. It also gives growth data, which is an important metric that we use and is built into many of our plans.
Can I just get clarity? Because I think I heard 2 things. I just need to know which one is accurate. MAP is not an assessment tool that we are bound by state to use. Is that my
Not in South
understanding?
Dakota.
Okay.
Many states, and maybe South Dakota did at one point, required both a norm referenced assessment, which is a nationally normed test, as well as a state level test. And so there's value in both of those for different reasons. State assessments are tied directly to your state standards. Norm referenced assessments give you that picture of where is a child at this particular grade level, at this particular point in time, where should they be for adequate academic progress. And so that's why, if you let go of that and you're just left with the state assessment, and like I said, our district benchmark assessments have come a long way. Linda McDaniel and others have done a lot of work on that, particularly at that elementary up into middle and high school level. But I wouldn't say that the district is at a point where people would feel like that's now reliable. If you do some crossover checks with those other assessments, I don't know that we're quite there yet, but that might be a question or part of your priorities for next year. Did I answer your question? Okay.
Yeah, that helped. What else did you have written down there?
I have one more question. This was regarding the plan to transfer some positions to title program funding. We had different line items in here. If we were unsuccessful in securing those funds, what contingency plans are in place? I think that might be annulled.
He's grabbing his mic, so I think he's.
And it's difficult to hear, so if you could repeat it once more. I believe I understood that if we move things to the title and it's not funded there, what do we do?
Yes.
Okay. We will still be able to move it over there for this next year. We anticipate that to not be an issue. The question will be if the funding does not come through from the federal, that just means we have to remove it for the next year and make decisions of what we would move and not fund that portion of it any longer. So for the first year, which would be next year, FY '26, it would still be secured. FY '27 would bring it into question then if we do not receive the amount of federal funding we anticipate that we would.
Okay, that helps. Thank you.
Dawn, are you thinking about instructional coaches in middle school or reading
Intervention.
interventionists? I'm sorry. Okay. So,
Well, there was a few different ones that was the plan. So I'm just seeing what's next if.
Yeah, it would be any of the Title I. Gail, any of the Title I underneath the HR at the top?
No, not necessarily.
No, they're the ones that, most of those would say potential funding, but then would be out of title. So it's moving them for their cost center to title.
The reading interventional specialists to be funded in a different way. So some of these that say eliminate. I think
I
Nan was
thought you
asking
were-
for clarification. It wasn't
Yeah.
under the title ones. It was like the middle school sped, like the lit coach. We're hopeful that federal funding would take care of keeping them, right? Title funding, sorry. Like that's one example, but there was a few of them that we have hopes of it getting transferred over to title, but that was just the question of, do we have a contingency plan?
And it sounds like we don't have to worry about it for this year, but it could be,
Right.
to your point.
So the first year in the general budget, those would be removed and eliminated and cut. Then we would be able to look at that for the federal programs if it's in the title. And so for next year, we feel fairly confident with the dollars that we have allocated to there and the carryover in title that we'd cover that next year. If something happened to the federal funding, then it could possibly impact that for FY '27. We would discuss that then again and bring it back forward at next year's budget time. So with many of those things, we have it laid out over a couple of years what we would probably be looking at, but we feel confident for the budget packet for next year, those things would be funded as stated.
Something to keep an eye on.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Anybody else have any questions or comments? I just want to be respectful of our next presentation too, but I don't want to cut anybody off either. Anybody else? Good? Okay, thanks for the conversation. Do we need a pause? Was there anybody that wanted to give input, public input on the budget? Maybe. And it looks like nobody does. No, I'm kidding. Go ahead. Okay. No, you don't have to sign in on a work session. Oh, you do have to sign.
Address, everything, right? Or, okay.
Yeah.
My name is Tim Eckert, 2312 South Holt Avenue, Sioux Falls. And I really, truly appreciate all of the hard work that has gone into creating this budget, and being part of it in the large budget review committee has been a great experience to be able to see the diligence that everybody goes through when they make these decisions and when these budgets get approved. I'd like to speak about testing and about the amount that we do for testing, and wondering, and it was kind of just answered too a little bit, like this is something that we could look at in the future to see if there's any crossover points within the tests that we currently administer to our students, and how can we better utilize that data to reduce the amount of testing that we have for our students and increase the instructional time in the classroom. You know, we already use Mastery Connect, Lexia. Those are great tools. And speaking about like they're great tools for us to increase student outcomes. But what are we going to do when we talk about the reading intervention, this reduction at the middle school level? What kind of supports are we going to be able to have in place there for our students? I hope that our students, we're reducing because our student outcomes have been better, and we don't need that many people there anymore, because that would be ideal, right? Everything that we've been doing has been proven to be effective and successful, and we're reducing there out of necessity that way. If not, what are some of the ways that we can, that we're going to be able to make up for that we're going to be able to still help those kids? So I'm thinking about that when we make these decisions too. So thank you for your time.
Thanks, Tim. All right. So I believe our next meeting that we will tentatively adopt that is it the 4th? No, sorry, I'm looking at the calendar. 14th. So April 14th will be the next time that we discuss the budget and tentatively adopt. The rest of our time will be a presentation from Dr. Nold regarding his cell phone committee report and just kind of giving us a description of what they've been up to. And again, just for clarity, we don't vote at work sessions.
Nope.
So today we're just here to listen and take in any information and then kind of think on our own, I guess, and have further conversations about what that might look like.
Hey,
Before
and
Dr. Nold starts, I'm going to intervene before he takes my seat in a few weeks. I want to go back to the very beginning of this just to refresh our memories that this came about, really started probably last year about this time, where we had some parents who were very interested in looking at the issue of cell phones and an even bigger picture of just what are we doing to support students in their use of devices. But we know specifically cell phones are what can sometimes get in the way of that if students are bringing their own device, and it's causing a disruption. And so through that, we decided to have a process to really hear voices around that, because we know it's a big topic and one where there is not universal agreement. At the same time, there was a book that came out that's gotten a lot of attention called The Anxious Generation that many have read, which was a nice resource, and many of the people I think on the committee have read that as well. And so when we think about the blend of a device that all of us use every day, unfortunately, much of our day, students also are part of that picture, and I think that's what makes this unique, is it's not just an adult thing, it's not just a student thing, and so much of what we do is dependent upon that device now. So Dr. Nold, I want to give you credit for putting this process together and running these meetings, which he'll give you an overview of, but it was a really nice experience and a really thorough process, and I think one that the participants felt really good about along the way too. And so this is an overview of that information that takes their feedback, and it's been synthesized, but then, like we said, the board, if there are any decisions to make, it would probably come through any policy change or any other action that the board wants to have considered, depending on how you feel about the results of the committee.
Thank you. And I will go through and highlight some things. I won't go in depth into some of the data. You'll see where I use the data or the results from a survey to be able to give the recommendations. I'll definitely hit on those today. You have a couple different documents. The encouragement would probably be to follow the one that is the PowerPoint document, because that really has it condensed into something. The other report that you have will have all the data broken out, especially from the survey, and you'll see that a little more clearly there. You can do that at your leisure time of reading. And so for now, and then if there is any other changes, we can do that obviously at a board meeting if that's what the recommendation starts to come back in as. If it is not and it stays with the recommendation of the committee, then that would not be something we need to vote on. That would just be part of our discipline matrix that we establish and go through, and we do that each year, adjustments in that. And that would just be part of our normal process that we'd use and would not require the vote of the school board if they change anything. So as we go through this, we did work with the committee, And at the request of the school board, we did put the committee together to look at what are some of the things that may be impacted with cell phones, what does our community see in that. So that was really the purpose of this, and just to give you the results of that. We did go through and have 36 individuals, which included parents, students, teachers, principals, district administration, into 4 different meetings that we had. And really the conversation was the use of cell phones. We use cell phones as a word that really covers a lot of things, things that will access the internet. It could be through the smartwatches, it could be through cell phones, it could be through other means, but truly that was all encompassing, and we did explain that as we sent the survey out to individuals. And we definitely did not include things that would have been considered for medical purposes, because there are individuals through the IEP process or the 504 process that will need that for their medical purposes, and that would not be something that we were truly discussing. And we sent the survey out, we did explain that to individuals at the beginning of the survey. So as we go through, we really came up with, through the conversation, these questions. In the elementary, it was really, are we going to, what do we think of elementary students using cell phones or those type of devices on school buses to and from school? And then we looked at it with at the school day, during the school day. And then we looked middle school with the same thing, and middle school also during the same day, so school buses. High school is a little bit different. With the high school, we really looked at lunch periods, passing time, and the academic classroom time. And so those were the things we really looked at and tried to come up with the answers. What did the committee think on that? I would say some of these were very, very easy to come by. Some had a little bit of discussion. I'll share some of those that were a little harder to decide on and the reasons why. So first of all, the process, the committee discussed these different questions. It was determined that we would send out a survey. There was 11 different surveys that we created through the committee, and it really depended on who we were seeking the feedback from. And when I talk about that, it'd be principals. Obviously, then you have 3 of them there with high school, middle school, elementary, teachers with the same group. Students, we just surveyed. I know it's some people's disappointment, but we just surveyed high school, middle school. We did not ask that same thing of the elementary students. And then teachers and parents. And so we really looked through there to find some of that information. And with our responses back, we had 12,100 responses, which is an incredible survey response. Last time we saw numbers like that, we were looking at the school calendar. And that helped us to decide a process that has stood this test of time for the last 8 years now. And so when we go through, break it down a little bit, and I won't go through each of these numbers, but total teacher responses, you can see there's over 1,200. Student responses, almost 6,000. And then again, we just went with middle and high school there. You look at the total parents, and this is a part that we were incredibly pleased with, that we got a great response from our parents, 4,800, over 4,800, close to 4,900 parent responses. And then the principals, you can see going through, virtually every principal did respond. When I say principal, it could be elementary as well. Or I'm sorry, it could be assistant principals as well in that. So the response rate was very strong. There's 2 charts here that really put it into kind of a condensed version for you. If you look at the report, that'll give it all broken out through each question, the responses of each question. This really condenses it into 2 simple pages of information that you could look at, and breaks it down by which group, so elementary parent, middle school parent, and going through and kind of what the question was that was being asked in gray, and then the responses based on yes or no, or it was a Likert scale, how many times or rarely ever, whatever that may be. So the responses there, I'm not going to necessarily go through each one of those. You can look at that information and kind of come to your own conclusions on some of the things, but this benefited us greatly. You can also see across the top how many had responded in each one of those areas by report. Now, if you go in and add some of those up on your other document, it's a little bit hard to come to the same number. It could be off by 1 or 2 because not everyone answered every single question. And so your overall number may not match if you individually start to add those up. It isn't that I have a problem with math per se. It is more so that not every person answered every single question. And yeah, so why or why not, I'm not sure, but that's what happened. And so the second page of that, you can again begin to see that, and we did break it down again. But the part I'm going to go through is just what's the recommendation by the committee coming out. And so the first one on there, when we talk about elementary, should cell phones be used by elementary students on school buses going to and from school? You saw in there 58% of the parents said yes, 47% of the teachers said yes, so obviously 53% said no of those that responded, and the principals was 39% yes. We talked about that quite a bit in there. It's not our desire to have the cell phones on the buses, but it's incredibly hard to enforce. And so when you go through, one thing we did talk about, that if we're going to expect something, we need to be able to enforce it. That's a very difficult thing. So our recommendation that came out of there, it is recommended that elementary students not use their cell phones or other personal device on district-operated school buses, but this will not be a disciplinary event unless used inappropriately by the student. Because if you're going to truly have it on there and expect it, you're expecting then the bus driver is going to be stopping the bus to try to circumvent or intervene anytime an elementary student on the bus is using that. And we knew that'd be very difficult. Some bus drivers will write it down and send it in, others would not. But either way, they've got to at some point in time stop and go back and address the situation. Now, obviously, if it's a situation that causes a disruption, we now have the instant access to the video on the buses where the principals can go and see that right away and invoke the discipline that would be needed for that situation or investigate it and handle that at that point in time. So it was that our recommendation is to not have them on there, but we're not going to make it a disciplinary event because we could not enforce that evenly throughout the entire district. So that was a recommendation that came back there. It was fairly even split back and forth with regards to parents, teachers, and principals on that. The second question that came in, should it be used during the academic day for elementary students? And it was over resounding, no, they should not be. So we maintain the same standard that we had, that they should not be out, should not be utilized, should not be in view during the school day. And so that is currently what we have with the elementary. We would maintain that. We cleaned up a little bit of the language of the bus situation, and that's what we would propose to go forward with our discipline matrix. The next group is middle school. So when we start to talk about the middle school group, we again looked at the buses, and 83% of the parents said yes, 88% of the principals said yes, and an error came back with the teachers. I don't know how that happened, but that question did not populate for us. So as you go through, it's still held firm, though. It helped us with the elementary. It's not like we're going to make it more strict for the middle school than we would have for the elementary. But it is recommended that middle school students be allowed to with the cell phones or personal devices on the district buses. There did not seem to be an issue with that with our committee as we talked through that situation. Obviously, there's some that always have concern with cell phone use just overall. That's evident, but whether we were going to make it a disciplinary action if they were using those on the buses, we had decided that would be no. When we look at it as cell phone use by middle school students during the school day, you can see 78% of the parents said no, 94% of the teachers, 94% of the students said yes. So only 6% said no of the students, which did not surprise us. And then 94% of the principals. And so we did, as a committee, go through and decide that it should remain the same, that they should not be used in the middle schools from the start of the day to the end of the day, regardless of passing time or anything else. So with middle school, we maintain that that would be enforced, that is not utilized at the middle school during the academic day. Then we went to high school. And so the high school part of it, should cell phones be used in the high schools during the lunch periods? You can see the teacher responses, 78%, student responses, 99%, and principal responses, 88%. This part of it was something we did not spend a lot of time discussing. I thought we'd maybe have a little more of a push one way or another with the committee, but it was pretty generally agreed upon that they would be able to, or they agreed that it should be allowed to be used during the lunch period at the school setting. So that was the recommendation that comes out, that we would allow the current practice will remain in effect, that possessing a cell phone or other personal device during lunch period in the commons is permitted. Question 2 is probably where we had the greatest conversation overall with those. 1 was the elementary buses, and then 2 was during passing times. 62% of the teachers said yes, 97% of the students, and 69% of the principals. The recommendation there, I will say, was very mixed from our committee. Matter of fact, it ended up being 16-14, coming through as a recommendation to allow the use of cell phones during the passing time. And so the recommendation that came from the committee was the closest of any of the votes that we took, and that was the current practice will remain in effect, that possessing a cell phone or other personal device during the passing period in the hallway is permitted. And the final one is during the academic day, and this one, parents 49% no, teachers 68% no, students only 11% said no, and principals 56% no. Our recommendation from the committee seemed to be very overwhelming, that it should not be utilized during the academic day at the high school. So cell phone devices should not be unless otherwise. And we did want to change the language there because it had something to the effect of unless approved by the principal. And we didn't want to just be a standing approval. It really should be on a rare, unique occasion because we do have Chromebooks that every student has, so they have their device to be able to access stuff. It isn't the argument that used to be that, well, we can't take technology out of their hands. They have technology. We've given them that, so it's not the same argument that it was before. So it truly should be, unless otherwise authorized on rare occasions directly by the school principal, will not be allowed. And so unless it is approved that way. So the recommendation when you come through to the end of it is truly elementary, no change. Except for it will not be a disciplinary issue on the bus unless it creates a disruption. Middle school, no change. There's no addressing the cell phones on the buses. And then high school, it would not be allowed during the academic periods. That was a recommendation that came from the committee, largely based on the information received back from the surveys. We did go and look at a few different studies. There was a couple studies, especially a very large one done in England. There's different studies after that refute some of that it isn't even necessarily about the cell phone use at school. It's just cell phone use in general, and we can't control that part of it at home. There's obviously information out there that refutes some of that, how well that study was done. There's also multiple books completed, and studies done with the United States, many of which are saying it is not healthy for kids. We understand that. We know that part of it. A big piece of that is probably more so in general, they are not, and we know that. So how do we take it away entirely? Our biggest step on that is elementary, no, during the academic day, middle school, no, and high school, not during the academic periods. So that was a recommendation that came forward from the cell phone committee. And as I said, we had 36 individuals, and there was great attendance on that. I was very pleased with that, and it included students. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier, but some of our students on there did a really nice job of talking about some of the things and helping us develop some of the questions, because even though we knew high school, middle school students are going to say, yes, you should allow them all the time, we also put some questions in there. Have you ever seen it cause a disruption? Things like that. Well, yeah, I've seen that, but I still think people should have it. So it kind of contradicts itself a little bit on some of those things. But yet I fully understand that they hope to be seen as young adults and they're conscientious of what cell phones can and can't do. But we always know that adults can't even do that all the time. So we understand that we need to make sure that we try to keep it out of the academic space as much as we possibly can. That was the recommendation that came from the cell phone committee. I'd be happy to answer any questions I can.
I'm curious if there was any conversation or ideas shared about enforcement of the high school, not academic time use.
Yep. And so the discussion, I did share some of the information with the elementary principals, middle school principals, high school principals, and that's some things we're going to have to start working on now. Now, we tried to put some things in. I think it is fairly well done, not entirely. I understand that. But once we come with this, now part of it's going to be advertising that out to the community. I think that's something that we'll work on very strongly in July and August, and making sure we get that information out there. And then talking with the building principals that this is the expectation. We have to enforce this. You need to make it clear with the teaching staff, with the other staff, that these are the situations that came through. This is the response we had from our community. This is the expectation to be enforced. And so we'll have those communications. It wasn't probably as laid out as it is now, especially with the high school. Elementary's been consistent with it, middle school consistent, but there's hits, at times where maybe it wasn't, and we can reinforce that. High school, the big question came into where would it and where would it not be allowed, and each school is a little bit different on that.
Kind of related question, Dr. Knoll. First of all, good work from your committee.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I guess the follow-up to Carly's question is, will there be some tweaks to the discipline grids as a result of this?
We did, and I can share that at a later time too. We started to go through that. If this followed through as the recommendation, how is that going to look in the discipline matrix? So we've begun to change that and alter it. So I took that I've made it to 2 out of the 3 principal meetings now, and we'll take it to that 3rd group just to affirm with them these are things that they can enforce, and then the expectation will be that it's enforced. A lot of it's going to be like in the middle school, they can handle a lot of that at the team level. So taking the phone, one of the hardest parts was it had been in there from years ago that the phone would be taken and a parent must come in to pick it up. That's incredibly difficult, and it also hits on our relations a lot of times. So there's other ways that they can intervene on that and take care of that and address it. And so the principals really talked about what is much more practical that they can do, taking it away there, taking it away or having it turned in to the team, to the homeroom teacher each day, especially in the middle school. Elementary, that common teacher there would take it. Several of the teachers started at some of the schools having the pockets they could drop it into with the high schools. So some of that would be as well. We did not want to make that district-wide because then you also could start to look at some accountability for who, if you have them all put it there and the phone's gone at the end of the period, who's accountable for that. So we did begin those discussions. We've started to rewrite it. We have rewritten it, taken it back, and I've hit 2 out of the 3 now to be able to have them look at it and approve, and we've made a couple slight changes. Yes.
Thank you.
Oh, so much to consider. All I ask, I guess, at the end of this is that once we get something put in place, that we all really follow it. Because I know who the fun teacher was based off of who was lenient with their cell phone use in the classroom. And that's no fault to anybody, but there was a clear disruption when I was in classrooms of who was considered the mean teacher because they held true to what the policy said versus who was the fun teacher who let you use your phone during times that were against policy. So we really need to adhere to what we decide on, and whatever that looks like, everybody will need to follow through. And I know I'm saying stuff everybody knows, but it does get out and who's the cool teacher, who's not. So just listening to this and awesome feedback. Thank you for including students. I love that. But thank you again for the work behind this.
Yeah, we had a great showing of middle school, high school students who were on there and strong voices. Each one of them talked and shared some different perspectives, and it was really, really good to hear. As far as the enforcement, absolutely right. I mean, we know and administration knows that if 90% are following it and even 2% are not, if 98% are, it makes it very difficult for the rest. And so everybody has to be together on that part of it and be able to follow some of those. We always had some non-negotiables. These are the non-negotiables. Everybody's going to follow this. Then these are the things that, we can have a little leeway on. And so that's got to be one of those non-negotiables that we have.
What about using it as a reward, sort of like a PBIS reward, on the other side of it?
Yeah.
Maybe we need to have some real thought put into that as well.
Yeah, and definitely, I think there has to be some restriction in that, especially with social media. There's rewards that are very reinforcing and good. Social media can be negative in a lot of ways as well. So I don't know that that would be something we would definitely want to put in as that reward part of the PBIS, but there's definitely other things that they could do with some games and stuff. We were at a school where we were showing some individuals around, and in the last period of their day, on that day of the week, they had success time for those individual students that had fulfilled their plan for that week. And it was great for them to see, and they could do a few different things. So there's a lot of choices they have. Social media will just be one they won't be able to have.
I think most people would agree with that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think if you're a teacher in high school, you're in a tough spot. And the reason I say that is, so if an individual student walks in with a phone in their hand when they come in your door, okay, where are we at? And you maybe could have stretched me to let her have it during lunch, but just wrong, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to be an enforcement nightmare, which a lot of things are. Remember, we had badges. That was one of those that we finally just let go. So that's where I'm at. And I'll respect any decision that's made by the board or the administration.
Yeah.
But I just want you to know you're putting the heat on it.
I was amazed, and that's why we did the survey, because I did not want to leave it up to a group that would decide in isolation. And so I go to that question, should they be used during the lunch period? 78% of the teachers, that did surprise me, said yes. I knew that students would. That didn't surprise me. But 88% of the principals, 78% of the teachers said yes, they should. And that was a high response group. You know, when you go to the high school group that responded to that, you know, with high school teachers, we had almost 400 high school teachers respond. So it isn't that it's a small number responding. And so there were some areas that I was a little bit surprised. I thought they would come out and say, no, we should not. But a very significant number of high school teachers said, yes, they should. And so we did take that into consideration. Otherwise, we wouldn't have done the survey. But we did take into consideration what the response was, specifically with the teachers, because we knew that they'd be the ones pushing to enforce that. And so when a vast majority of them said, yes, they should, a little bit surprised on that, but we did take the recommendation into consideration when we made the final recommendation.
Mark, were you thinking it would be easier to enforce if they just said no use of cell phones during the day from when the bell rings?
Well, that'd be my first option.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm with you. Like, I think it's going to be really difficult to have them have it in their hand and then walk into a classroom and put it away and then walk out and get it back out. So I think that's going to be harder to police. And I guess I'm disappointed in the lunch aspect of it. I know previously when I spoke, I talked a lot about the socialization and having conversations and looking your peers in the eye and, you know, talking and things like that. And so it's disappointing to me. But then I also think about the last time I went out for dinner and that everybody surrounding me was doing the exact same thing. So why parents would choose to have them at lunch, they're probably like, well, I'm on my phone at lunch, or when we go out to dinner, we're on our phones. So what's the difference? But it is a difference when you're in that academic area. And so again, like I respect and I'm glad that we have such great results and great feedback. And that was the whole reason behind that. But to Mark's point, like it wouldn't have been what I would have chosen for the end result. But I didn't do it. It wasn't me, so that's okay.
It was not what I chose as a principal either. I mean, at my point in time, it was they're not going to be allowed from the start to the end.
Yeah.
Now I realize some of those times have changed a little bit, and so I anticipated it would come out a little more that way, but that's why we sent it out, so that we didn't guess and put it into specific data that we could look at and make judgments off of that.
Yeah, I would just add that this isn't a permanent decision. Just as you're looking at it this year, you can continue to do that. I was cleaning off my bookshelf one evening this week and pulled out a book from about 2010 that extolled the virtues of bringing iPods into the classroom and cell phones, because you could record children reading to themselves, and that would be a great way to involve kids in their reading. Well, that kind of has come and gone, and I think this will continue to evolve. I also think you see some activity at a state and federal level that may have some impact on that. So I don't think you have to look at this as final. You can continue to review, and after next year, if you want to continue to make changes, you can still do that.
Good point.
Agreed. We can see how it goes through this year with the enforcement of that and the difficulty, and maybe people will feel differently then. We can look at it again at that point in time. But it was a great process to go through and have the committee and the discussions there. It was good to hear from student voices and parent voices throughout that process, and then to get the results back from our community, teachers, principals, and students was very powerful, because it maybe didn't come out exactly how we thought it was going to, but the numbers were very strong with over 12,000 people completing the survey. It does represent what our students, staff, and community parents wanted.
Thank you.
Yep.
I just want to clarify. So next steps, like, again, we don't approve anything today. So you will bring forward a board report at some point with recommendations from the committee for us to approve.
There really is, I mean, the changes would just be that we go through our discipline matrix and we make those changes in there. It's only if the board would like to make some type of a change and put something into policy.
Okay.
Other than that, there would be no further report. This is the information and the work that the committee did. It'll move forward into our discipline matrix, which doesn't require anything from the board on that.
Perfect.
But if the board did decide that they wanted to make a recommendation different than this and put it into policy, then it would come back to the board for that.
Thank you for clarifying. I appreciate that.
You could also, after July, August, when you go to start to put those things out, clarify the final kind of changes that were made to the board so that there's clarity on that.
Yeah, and we can share that with all the board members so they see what the discipline matrix is and send that.
Is there anybody that wanted to provide public feedback on this topic? Okay, seeing none. I don't believe we have anything else on our agenda, so can I get a motion and a second to adjourn, please?
So moved.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. We are adjourned.